Hey everybody, welcome back. Tonight we're going to talk about wine quality, and this is for the VD 304 class, wine components at Full Summit College, right? So we've progressed enough in this class to talk about sight, smell, taste, touch, and then even wine faults. But now we're going to kind of shift gears. Now that you know how to properly taste wine, go through the motions, and assess it. Now we're really going to have the discussion of quality and talk about how wines are scored and how they're perceived. So when we think about quality, we think about you know you think about quality outside of the world of wine. What is quality to you? What are quality clothes? A quality vehicle, restaurant, food, wine. Like, what does it mean, right? I mean, there are there are things such as brand recognition. There is a conversation of like, well, I might like something because this is really held up. I think it's a good price for what I'm paying for, right? Or maybe there's a story behind the brand of how that was made and that's important to you, right? So that's quality to you. So quality can mean something different to all of us. And so that's a really good perspective to keep in mind as we go through and start tasting wine and seeing what we think a quality wine is, right? So Webster's definition of quality could be four different things. One, so it could be a characteristic or attribute of something, a property, a feature, right? So it is a quality of something, right? It's also the natural or essential character of something, right? It also means excellence and superiority, right? Like this is it. This is a quality wine, right? Or this is a quality of the wine is, right? It's also a degree or grade of excellence. It's also a high social position and people of high social positions, right? Could also be seen that. So I guess a proper example of that would be they are a person of quality, right? So they are in high social position, they are seen well, or they are in a status that is seen higher. Okay, for quality in wine specifically, we have a quote here from Dr. Richard Nelson, which is really nice. It says, quality is an intellectual phenomenon that occurs between the wine and the taster. So just off the bat, we know that quality is going to be a very personal thing, especially in wine, right? It isn't all things, but especially in wine, right? So this is a standard of acceptance at my current level of development, right? So depending on how much experience you have in wine tasting, what may be quality for you may be completely different than what's quality for someone else from what they've experienced, right? So it's also an objective standard of excellence with an absence of technical faults, right? And so now that we've gone through wine faults, we've tasted through some faults, now we can actually really tell, when a wine is of quality is lacking of faults, right? It's also a measurement of the extent to which an item satisfies one of the senses, right? So, do you enjoy it? Period. Do you enjoy it? Right? All right. So, this is where we kind of reach a double-sided coin, right? So quality should have both physical and psychological attributes. So physical, like it's a good, well-made wine. There's no faults. There's no fault to this wine. It doesn't have, VA. It doesn't have, bitterness, extreme vegetal character, right? It's maybe what we would expect for that variety, right? So there's that minimum baseline, right? But then when we talk about quality, there's also the psychological component, right? The anticipation and the expectations, right? And this can happen when we're presented with a price point, right? When we're presented with a certain label or a certain setting and what we're tasting the wine, right? So if you take home a bottle that's $100, your expectations are going to be this better taste like $100 bottle of wine, right? So you're going to have high expectations as soon as you pop that cork, right? And then if you, on the flip side, right, if you take home a $10 bottle of wine, you could be like, you know what? I got what I paid for and I enjoyed it. And there's nothing wrong with that either, right? So there's that. Okay. Here's a good quote from Alan Young from the Making Sense of Wine Tasting book. And he says, we preset standards. If the event or item meets those expectations, then we are happy and we will give it a quality rating, right? But if we do not meet those standards, if that product does not meet our standards, then we're not going to be stoked and we're not going to give it a quality rating, right? So the real definition for quality in wine, it's a composite response of sensory properties of the wine based off of expectations from previous experiences and personal preferences. Individual responses will differ. I know that was a really kind of like broad example of what quality is, but that is what quality is at the end of the day for wine. So we'll have a lot of experience when we come to class and we do our wine judging lab. You guys will get to taste through a panel of Cabernet Sauvignons, all completely different price points and from different parts of the world. You'll taste the wine first, then we will reveal the price after you give it a score, right? Taste it, give it a score, and then we will talk about a value afterwards, right? So that'll be really fun. I always love doing that lab. So when we taste wine, it's really important that we can separate objective standards and personal preferences, right? So both are involved when they talk about wine quality. So if someone handed me a glass of wine and they said, analyze this wine, do you think it's of good quality, right? First, I would look at, does the wine have any spoilage characters, right? Just very objectively, does it have spoilage or not, right? Or does it have any flaws? Those are objective standards, right? That is what my response would be to you. If you ask me, do you like this wine? That's a different question because it could be along the personal preference of maybe someone doesn't like Zinfandel. Maybe they don't like sweet wines. Maybe they only like bold wines, or maybe they prefer fruity wines, right? So there's a big difference between objective standards, does the wine have any faults, and personal preferences, right? And when those come together, that's when your personal definition of quality comes into play, right? So those are things to keep in mind, right? And also, like, when you're tasting other people's wines, right, keep in mind too, like, don't just be like, oh, well, I just don't like Zin, or I just don't like Syrah, or whatever it may be, right? Just think about, did it meet all the boxes? Does it have, a finish, a beginning and a finish? Is it cohesive? Is there a transition point there, right? Does it have any overwhelming bitterness? Does it have any faults, right? Think about it on that frame, right? Okay, so we have quality, and part of the conversation with quality is the cost value analysis, right? So me and my significant other love having this conversation all the time. We're really big foodies. We love going out to eat, and we love going somewhere and, talking about like, oh, is the price worth the food, right? Because a lot of foods, especially locally, are just, Sysco delivered, frozen ingredients that they just throw into a fryer and then throw onto a plate and then charge you $25 later when we could have, made something at home for a lot less expensive. That's actually much better. So anyways, example, you go to a restaurant and you pay $30 for a cheeseburger and you're asking, was it worth it, right? Now, what makes it worth it for that cost is how it was presented, how it tasted, service environment, and other factors as well, right? But you could say, well, did it look appetizing? Did it look clean? Did it have hair on it? Serving size, right? Did you pay $30 for a cheeseburger, but it looked like a slider, like a little tiny thing? And then how it tasted. What were the ingredients that went into that? Was it Wagyu? Was it, just some frozen Costco patty? Was it even seasoned, right? And then the service and environment. Did you wait a long time? Were the staff kind and welcoming? Was it a clean restaurant? Was it a welcoming experience? Would you pay to go to that environment again, right? So at the end of the day, this is where we, me and my significant other have a lot of conversations about like, what could be better, or what we enjoy. And then we have restaurants that we really, really love and we go back to a lot because we feel like it's a really good value for what we get, right? So think about that for you and think about what that means to you if you had an experience like that, right? But then also think about what that could look like in a tasting room or even in a winery setting, right? Okay, so expectations created in wine. I love this conversation. So wine can be enjoyed in many different settings, right? It could be a frat party. It could be at a very sophisticated tasting. It could be at a, very special event. But wine creates its own set of expectations depending on what you purchase, right? So in your mind, in the back of your mind, you already have expectations for what this is going to be, right? So the first thing that creates an expectation is cost. You're purchasing a wine, and like I said, if you purchase a $5 bottle, you have a vague idea of what you're getting into. And if you're purchasing a $100 bottle of wine, you have expectations for, this better be good. I spent a lot of money, right? So cost. The label itself also creates expectations and also creates a setting for the environment of how you may be anticipating how you will enjoy it in, right? So if the label is super, super fun and colorful, maybe is silly, right? Maybe this will be a wine you just take to a party, or maybe you're enjoying it at home by yourself, Then there we have like our sophisticated labels, our traditional wine labels, like the Silver Oak here. It's always something very, could be something hand drawn, something etched, something elegant, right? So this gives this artistic view of like high Napa society a little bit, right? So label expectations, right? The color and the smell of the wine, the taste and the finish also, put together this image of what you received, and then also the health effects, right? So did you drink, did you chug, a box of wine, right? Did it give you a headache? Did it make you feel sick, right? Did you have something a little more expensive? And did you have, maybe a little bit of a smoother transition the next day, right? So expectations created, but also from the marketing, but also your own personal experiences as to what happened with that, right? And no shame here. Wine should be enjoyed by everyone, and there's a setting for everything for wine. I think the industry has really pushed the, the high society image too much. I think we really shot ourselves in the foot, but wine should be enjoyed by everyone. Okay. So, variability of perception, right? We're all very interestingly different people, but we're all the same people at the same time, which is really bizarre, right? So let's talk about the human brain. The human brain is roughly 3 pounds. We have tens of billions of nerve cells and even more supporting cells in our brain. And this is where we process a lot of information, right? So sight, smell, touch, and taste. Smelling and tasting can affect your behavior, your memory, learning, and your emotional state, and possibly other activities essential for your health and well-being, right? So this is where we get a lot of people getting into, making sure they have a clean space, lighting a candle when they're stressed out, smelling something that makes them feel relaxed, right? All the essential oil crazy people. I was one, don't worry. And everything else, right? So it makes sense, right? What we feed our brain, what we feed our bodies is going to affect our overall health, right? That makes sense, right? So more often than not, our emotions and cultural prejudices are used rather than our senses. And that's because through many, many years of evolution and experience, right, we're often very judgmental creatures before we actually stop and use our senses sometimes. It's because we prefer what we are familiar with, and we like to put things in boxes. We like to be like, oh, well, this goes here, and this is like this, and this is like this, and we don't always give room for that gray area of interpretation, right? So if we are tasting something or we are experiencing something that we are familiar with, it actually creates a response in our bodies of danger, right? So if you are not familiar with something and you don't know what to expect, that lack of control triggers a danger response, and it's not always a positive outcome, right? So we enjoy what we're familiar with because we know what to predict, right? It's not scary, but now that we know that, we can be better. Okay, so now I'm going to go through a couple different studies on quality. And this first one was a study on individual preferences, right? So I love this study. I think this is so interesting. So here we have in France, 6 champagne winemakers. They were asked to evaluate wines or champagne on a scale from 0 to 10 on acid, sugar, alcohol, acid, sugar, and alcohol combinations, right? Interestingly enough, even though they were all the top winemakers of their region, they didn't even agree with each other about what quality was for sparkling wine, right? So their answers weren't even close to each other, right? And these are people who are, their career, their profession is making champagne, all of them, and they can't even agree on what the best champagne was, right? So this is a really good example that individual preferences are very, very real, even among the professionals who specialize in this stuff, right? I mean, it makes sense that we know that, everyday customers are going to have different preferences. Even the professionals can't agree, right? So it kind of brings up this conversation of, it makes it just very real that quality is a very personal thing, right? More studies on quality for cultural group preferences, right? So there were 27 wines from 8 different countries. They were judged by a professional panel of 14 judges, right? So they performed that same contest in France, London, UK, New York, San Francisco, Noreuta, and Australia. So all across the globe, right? The same contest, right? And these were all tasted through trained judges, right? In each country, the judges were asked to name the top 12 wines of the 27, right? So this is almost half of the wines, right? Can we agree? Can all these judges agree that almost half the wines are the top, right? So let's see. So there were in France, right? They selected 6 Burgundy wines in their top 12. So, and number 1 and number 2 on the list were the 2 cheapest wines, ironically, right? And so this was a blind judging, right? They did not know the varieties, they did not know the pricing, right? In London, they selected only 1 Burgundy wine in their top 12, and it was the most expensive. And neither of the US or Australia panels chose any Burgundy wines in their top 12. Okay. So that just kind of shows that the results are skewed, right? Also, you're going to like what you grew up with, right? French judges will recognize and appreciate Burgundy wines and French wines, excuse me. And so it makes sense that that is going to be what they select, right? In London, they did like a French wine. Interestingly enough, it was the most expensive. I don't know what that says about the people of London, but good for them, right? And then Australia and the US, bless their souls, they didn't choose any of the Burgundy wines. And that's okay, right? I don't know what else was on the panel. There were a lot of other things, but it just goes to show even judges who are trained in this profession will choose what they're culturally used to or what they appreciate, right? There are preferences amongst everyone. Everyone will have a preference, right? Okay, so the next one was a study on wine consumers versus professionals, right? So this was a study by Young in 1986 and 1987. So here we had red and white wines from Australia and New Zealand judged by 4 different panels. They had female consumers, male consumers, female professionals, and male professionals, right? And so this was important because they were curious if the results would be based off of knowledge and professionalism, or if the results could be aligned by gender, which was really interesting too. So the study involved more than 2,000 wines and 150 judges participated, which is really interesting. So the final conclusions. Consumers and professionals have entirely different criteria as to what represents quality to them. There is less than 5% chance that consumers and professionals will select the same wine as being the best in any class. And there is decidedly more consensus among consumers than among professionals. And this poses the question, is any professional judgment worthwhile? If so, which one? Right? Consumers agree more than professional judges do. Insanity, right? So keep that in mind when you look at your wine scores. And, if you find a wine writer that posts scores and you taste those wines and you agree and you like that, keep following that wine writer, right? But also take it with a grain of salt, right? Just because someone tells you that you should like this wine doesn't mean that you will or that you should. You enjoy what you enjoy. And that's the takeaway of today, right? All right. So if we're going to talk about objective definitions for wine analysis, here are some definitions for you guys, right? So sight is appearance and color, smell, aroma, and bouquet, touch, the feel, the texture, the body, viscosity, taste, sugar, salt, acid, bitter, umami, flavor is a combination of smell, touch, and taste, structure is mouthfeel, a combination of touch and taste senses. Balance is a fusion of all the above in-mouth sensations, and evolution talks about like the aging, maturity, and bottle development of that wine, right? So, all right, and that brings us to our learning objectives for part 1 and part 2 here for you guys. Mostly this presentation is just about starting a conversation, right? It's to change your perspective on how you think about wine maybe not feel any shame about what you currently like, right? But also being open to trying something new and something different that you haven't had before. So, anyways, looking forward to seeing you all for our wine judging competition. And that's all for now. Thanks for watching.